Today I want to talk about something that most people completely missed. Not because it was hidden, not because it was classified, but because it was announced in the most casual, almost dismissive way imaginable, buried at the bottom of a social media post by a Ukrainian artillery brigade that seemed almost embarrassed to mention it. On April 2nd, Ukraine's 52nd Artillery Brigade listed its equipment for the world to see. The Bodna self-propelled Howitzer, the RM-70 Vampire rocket system, and then, almost as an afterthought, tucked in at the end, the 203mm M110 Howitzer, an afterthought. Now, if you know what the M110 is, if you understand what this weapon did during the Cold War, what it was designed to destroy, and what it is capable of doing on a modern battlefield, you did not read that social media post and see an afterthought. You read it and saw something else entirely. You saw a warning. Here is what I want to walk you through today. The M110 is a weapon that the US military officially retired decades ago. On paper, it has no place in a 21st century conflict. And yet, here it is, deployed on the front lines of the most consequential land war in Europe since World War II. And the reason it is there, the reason it matters, and the reason Russia is completely unprepared for it, tells us something profound about the nature of this war. Putin thought he had seen everything Ukraine had to offer. He was wrong. Let me take you back to October 2025, because that is where this story actually begins. Not on the front lines, not in a factory, in a diplomatic agreement between two NATO allies that most people did not pay close attention to at the time, but absolutely should have. Greece approved the transfer of 60 of its M110 howitzers to Ukraine. Along with those 60 guns came 150,000 artillery shells and a package of Zuni rockets. Total value of the deal, roughly 199 million euros, or just under $230 million. The weapons would travel through the Czech Republic and arrive in Ukraine exactly as they were. No modifications, no refurbishment, no upgrades. Now on the surface, that sounds like a great deal for Greece. They are offloading old equipment they no longer want. They get paid. Ukraine gets something worn and outdated. But that is not how the people making this decision saw it. Greece has operated the M110A2 since the early 1980s. For 4 decades, it was their primary long-range artillery solution. But as Greece modernizes its military towards standard NATO 155mm systems, the M110 became surplus, powerful but redundant, a gun without a mission. For Ukraine, redundant is relative. A weapon without a mission in peacetime becomes a weapon with a very specific mission in wartime. And when that weapon can fire a shell weighing close to 200 pounds at targets miles away, the word outdated starts to feel like a serious miscalculation on Russia's part. Greece saw old equipment, Ukraine saw opportunity, and Russia saw nothing coming at all. I want to spend a moment on the math here, because in warfare, numbers are not statistics. Numbers are decisions, numbers are lives, and the numbers behind this particular deal are genuinely remarkable. 60 howitzers. That is what Ukraine received in the first batch. But here is what came with those 60 guns. 50,000 M106 high-explosive rounds, the standard shell for direct destruction of fortified positions and troop concentrations. 40,000 M650 rocket-assisted rounds, shells that use a small rocket motor to extend their range significantly beyond what a standard propellant charge can achieve. 30,000 M509A1 dual-purpose cluster munitions, designed to shred both armor and personnel simultaneously, and another 30,000 M404 improved conventional munitions, a later addition to the M110 shell family, developed specifically to increase lethality against hardened targets. 4 different shell types, 4 different battlefield problems solved by the same gun. Now let us talk price. Greece valued each M110 at 520,000 euros, roughly $599,000 per unit. Multiply that by 60 howitzers, and the total cost for the entire artillery package comes out to approximately $35.90 million. Factor in 150,000 shells and Ukraine's cost per round drops to under $1,300. Think about that for a moment. Less than $1,300 per round from a gun capable of obliterating a tank, a command post, or an ammunition depot. For a country managing a $112 billion defense budget in 2026 while still facing a $45 billion shortfall, that is not just a good deal. That is a force multiplier that costs almost nothing relative to the damage it delivers. A Cold War gun at Cold War prices, solving a very modern problem. Here is something that military analysts do not talk about enough when they discuss artillery. A single powerful gun is dangerous, but a system of complementary guns, each one covering the weaknesses of the others, each one extending the reach and the lethality of the whole, that is something categorically different. That is not just firepower, that is architecture. And what Ukraine's 52nd Artillery Brigade now has is frankly a masterpiece of artillery architecture. Let me walk you through it. The Bodna is Ukraine's domestically produced self-propelled howitzer. Precision is its defining characteristic. When Ukraine needs to reach out and destroy a specific target, a Russian command and control center, located in a building 10 miles behind the front line, an ammunition depot being used to supply an ongoing assault, a logistics hub that is feeding troops into an active push, the Bodna is the answer. One gun, one target, one less problem for Ukraine to deal with. The RM-70 Vampire is a multiple launch rocket system, where the Bodna is a scalpel, the Vampire is a sledgehammer. When Russian forces mass for a mechanized assault, when armor and infantry concentrate in numbers large enough to threaten a breakthrough, the Vampire saturates that concentration with rockets simultaneously. It does not pick a target, it eliminates a zone. And then there is the M110. The M110 fills the gap that neither the Bodna nor the Vampire can cover. Hardened targets, fortified positions, bunkers, reinforced supply lines, heavily protected rear area infrastructure that standard artillery cannot penetrate. The M110, with shells weighing close to 200 pounds, can. Here is what that combination looks like in practice. The Vampire tears apart the assault units as they advance. The M110 destroys the hardened positions those assault units were trying to use for cover and support. And the Bodna reaches deep behind all of it, degrading Russian logistics, targeting command structures, and ensuring that every future assault is weaker than the one before it. 3 guns, 3 roles, 1 brigade that just became significantly more lethal than it was last month. There are places in every war that carry weight far beyond their size. Kramatorsk is one of those places. It is one of 4 major cities that form what military analysts have called the Donetsk Fortress Belt, a defensive line stretching roughly 31 miles along the H-20 highway in eastern Ukraine. These 4 cities are not simply urban centers, they are anchors. They are the structural backbone of Ukraine's entire defensive posture in the east. If Kramatorsk falls, the fortress belt fractures. If the fortress belt fractures, Donetsk becomes vulnerable. And if Donetsk falls, well, that is precisely what Vladimir Putin has been trying to accomplish since February 2022. Ukraine has had more than a decade to prepare for this moment. After Russia's initial campaign of aggression in 2014, Ukrainian forces spent years transforming Kramatorsk into something that military planners call a prepared defensive position, which is a polite way of saying that every block, every building, every approach route has been thought through, fortified, and planned for. Russian forces have known this for years. They have been trying to take the city anyway. Now, a 110 howitzers are operating in the Kramatorsk sector. Consider what that means for any Russian commander trying to plan an operation in that area. Any troop concentration, any armor staging area, any forward command post within range of a 203mm gun that fires 200-pound shells is now a high-value target, not a potential target, not a theoretical risk, an active imminent danger that requires constant dispersal and concealment, which degrades combat effectiveness before a single Russian soldier ever reaches the front line. Kramatorsk was already one of the most costly objectives Russia has attempted to pursue in this war. The arrival of M110s in that sector just raised the price considerably. Let me describe something to you that I think genuinely deserves more attention than it receives in mainstream coverage of this war. Ukraine has built what it calls kill zones, and the term does not even begin to capture what they actually are. These are not simply mined areas or defensive perimeters. They are engineered environments, miles-deep corridors of overlapping, mutually reinforcing threats designed to accomplish two things simultaneously. First, to kill anything that enters them. Second, to make certain sections of terrain so impassable that Russian forces are physically unable to advance through them and are forced instead to go around. Inside a typical Ukrainian kill zone, you have anti-tank mines and anti-personnel mines laid in interlocking fields. You have anti-tank ditches, trenches wide and deep enough to stop armored vehicles in their tracks. You have dragon's teeth, concrete obstacles that create impassable barriers for any wheeled or tracked vehicle. Above all of it, FPV drones patrol continuously, guided by operators watching live feeds, waiting for anything that moves. And for infantry trying to penetrate on foot, there are miles of barbed wire tunnel networks designed for ambushes, and sniper positions established at every natural choke point. Nothing goes through a Ukrainian kill zone intact. So Russian forces go around, and when they go around, they are channeled by the geometry of the kill zone itself into open ground, into wide spaces between defensive lines, where they have no cover, no concealment, and nowhere to go. That is where artillery is waiting. Now add M110 howitzers to that equation. Shells weighing close to 200 pounds, falling into ambush points where Russian soldiers have been deliberately herded. No vehicle survives that kind of impact. No field fortification withstands it. No troop concentration remains intact after M110 rounds begin falling. The kill zone was already lethal. The M110 just made it catastrophic. I want to close with something that I think is genuinely worth sitting with. There is a profound irony running through this entire story. Russia is a modern military power. It has a defense budget that dwarfs most of Europe. It has hypersonic missiles, advanced electronic warfare systems, and nuclear capabilities that make it one of the most formidable military forces on the planet. And yet, in Ukraine, Russia is fighting like it is 1955. Wave infantry assaults, overwhelming numbers rather than superior tactics. Predictable assault patterns that Ukrainian defenders have had years to study, anticipate, and prepare for. The same approach, repeated with minor variations, month after month, absorbing catastrophic losses, replacing them with more bodies, and trying again. There is a principle in military history that is sometimes called the predator-prey relationship of warfare. A predator evolves to match its prey, and the most effective predators are not always the newest or the most technologically sophisticated. They are the ones perfectly adapted to the specific vulnerabilities of the creature they are hunting. The M110 was designed during the Cold War to destroy exactly the kind of mass mechanized assaults that Russia is currently conducting. Dense troop formations, armor concentrations, the kind of Soviet-era offensive doctrine that NATO spent 40 years preparing to defeat. Russia, fighting as though the Cold War never ended, has created the perfect conditions for a Cold War weapon to thrive. But Ukraine will not stop there. This country has made a habit of taking Western equipment and finding ways to use it that even the original designers never imagined. The Abrams tank modifications that Ukraine has developed are so innovative that the US military is studying them. The same creative adaptation will be applied to the M110. A Cold War titan has been revived, and it has found in Putin's antiquated strategy exactly the prey it was built to hunt. If Russia wants to fight a 20th century war, Ukraine just made sure it has a 20th century weapon ready and waiting.